Now time for perspective. 6 months later than planned, King Charles III, accompanied by Queen Camilla, is embarking on a 3-day state visit to France starting this Wednesday. It is, of course, his first state visit to the UK's historic ally since his coronation. So along with the prerequisite pomp and pageantry, what else should we expect? My guest today is Andrew Smith, historian of modern France and director of liberal arts at Queen Mary University. Thank you so much for speaking to us on France 24 today. Now, this is Charles's first visit to France since the death of his mother, Queen Elizabeth. What do you think the King is hoping to get out of this trip?
Well, I think very much he wants to establish himself, to show that he is following in the footsteps of his mother, receiving the same type of honour and pomp and ceremony, as you mentioned, from the French Republic, but also demonstrating his own priorities, I think, and his own character. And we know already that he's highlighted that he'll be visiting a Grand Cru Chateau in Pessac-Léognan in Bordeaux, an organic winery, to demonstrate some of his organic credentials, as well as a visit to the Natural History Museum in Paris to talk about, ideas of biodiversity at a round table as well. So I think this is about demonstrating who Charles wants to be himself, as well as renegotiating and re-establishing, shall we say, perhaps, those ideas of Franco-British ties, which have consistently been so strong over the years, except for the very recent past.
Now, in the evening, Wednesday evening that is, President Macron and his wife Brigitte set to be hosting the royal couple in a sumptuous state banquet at the Royal Palace of Versailles. The site, of course, synonymous with French royalty, also, of course, its demise, I should mention. France clearly very determined to make a good impression on the new king.
Absolutely. You mentioned there's meant to be blue lobster on the menu. We've heard that all the chefs and everyone else have been replanning their meals to make sure they're seasonal and fantastic and all the rest. But you're right. This represents something quite important. It's another element of tradition. In the same way that the Queen, the late Queen, Queen Elizabeth II, was received with state dinners, with formal representation. We know one thing that won't be on the menu, which is foie gras, because King Charles has banned it from all the royal residencies. So that won't be on the menu. Again, another symbol of that personal touch. But I think this is, really emblematic of something about a re-establishing of those types of traditions, an attempt to show that this is an old friendship, an old kind of alliance that comes together. It comes off the back of, I think, warming political relations. Of course, the kind of quite cool relations between France and the UK under the premierships of Boris Johnson and Liz Truss, where there was a lot of quite kind of provocative statements made, often jibes at France's expense, which really kind of damaged relations in quite a strong way. We've seen attempts to rebuild that under the Prime Minister Rishi Sunak. Of course, at the start of the year, we saw the signing of the Windsor Framework, which, it's kind of renegotiated some of the elements of the Brexit framework around Northern Ireland. We've seen talks between France and Britain in mid-March over immigration, but also very recently as well, very recently, the visit of the leader of the opposition, Keir Starmer, to Paris as well, where he gave Emmanuel Macron an Arsenal strip and received a pair of cufflinks in return. So I think this symbolises a real warming of those types of political relations, a more open engagement. But also I think for the king, it is something of a moment to establish himself, his legacy in terms of what he represents, but also kind of establish his priorities. We mentioned there ecology. We mentioned ideas also. We could see Brigitte Macron and Queen Camilla will be hosting the prize for a new Franco-British Literary Prize at the BNF. And we also other things about sports. We can see some meetings there, as well as more traditional processions, more traditional kind of symbolic kind of processions about commemoration of war. For example, at the Arc de Triomphe, at the Eternal Flame, the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier, there will be a kind of défile, a kind of march, as well as flyovers and representation as well. So I think this is really important to see where, it's about confirming old ties and reaffirming how important those are to both countries, as well as recognising new opportunities for political partnership in changing political times as well. So I think it's quite an important landmark visit, I reckon.
And we have heard a fair bit in the French and British press that President Macron and King Charles have a strong personal rapport. What is that rapport based on, and how are we expecting it to be expressed over the course of the next few days?
Well, we know certainly that King Charles is a good French speaker. This is not a situation where he will be expecting the whole visit to be conducted in English. Charles, of course, has made many previous visits to France. I think this is actually his 35th visit to France. His mother, of course, made 6 official state visits, and this represents, I think, a kind of a real strong connection in that way. Charles's last visit was in 2019 on the 75th anniversary of D-Day, where he visited Bayeux Cathedral. And those types of kind of continuous engagement, I think, with moments of ceremony, with the memory of a certain greatness of France and Britain, of a certain solidarity and cooperation during moments of extreme test, are something that testament and important to both men. For Emmanuel Macron, of course, we saw at his very first inauguration, right back when he was elected president for the first time, his embrace of people like Daniel Cordier, Jean Moulin's aide-de-camp, his embrace of Gaullist symbols as he rode down the Élysée in that open-top military vehicle. For Charles, of course, we know that his family have been tied in to those types of commemorations. Even his grandmother, the late Queen Mother Elizabeth, had that strong relationship with the Special Forces Club. She was, of course, involved in Opération Croix-Lorraine when the French Prime Minister at the time, Bourges Manuel, came and inaugurated a plaque in London in memory of the wartime resistance and secret agents and all the rest. So both men have that really strong values tie to the history of Franco-British cooperation and what can make both countries great, fighting for ideas of freedom in the face of Nazism and specific values which they hold dear. So I think those ideas of pomp and ceremony, the ideas of long-standing institutions and the values that they hope to promote today. They've been looking to engage on things like climate change, of course, supporting Ukraine. We heard that in your last feature as well. And I think these will be important elements that they will discuss during the visit.
Now, the Queen, the late Queen, she did, I think it's fair to say, carry a fair bit of clout here in France. There's a fair bit of respect for her among the French populace. King Charles, at least right now, not enjoying quite as much popularity. Do you think that's going to be difficult in the coming days? For Charles, I mean?
Sure, yeah. I mean, it's always difficult for the new guy, but yeah, of course, the Queen's first visit to France was in 1957, and she was welcomed by René Coty, president then. But of course, that means that was 57. That was a previous republic. The Fifth Republic has previously only known one British monarch, and so it is a big change, I think, for France to see a new monarch in place in Britain. We heard, of course, President Macron's very touching tribute to the late Queen on the occasion of her death. And I think this is a moment when Charles hopes to re-establish himself in the eyes of France, an important partner for Britain. We know that he's going to be meeting crowds at various points. We know, of course, we mentioned some of the visits to museums, to sports places. He'll also be visiting Notre Dame and meeting crowds around there. Will be an exchange with the people that are responsible for rebuilding Notre Dame in Paris as well. So I think there's going to be a lot of important moments for Charles to establish himself in that moment. Will he recapture that affection that the Queen had? That will be difficult. That comes with that long-standing service. Charles has yet to demonstrate that in quite the same way. But I think he will hope to make that image of himself as an ecological king something that the French can connect with. A different style of monarchy, perhaps, but one he hopes that will strike a similar note of friendship alongside President Macron.
And it's worth mentioning, isn't it, that this trip was postponed by 6 months. This was meant to be the King's first state visit. That didn't happen. Mass rioting here in France in the wake of Macron's pension reform put paid to that. That was rather embarrassing for France, it's worth remembering.
Yeah, very much so. It was an embarrassing moment. It was, of course, the use of the 49.3, of course, the forcing through of the pension reform, the vitriolic response which was met by that from really a broad section of the French Republic, right across the country, and not just in Paris. But of course, that made it really impossible to arrange this type of visit, because it really promised that it likely would have been embarrassing for the French state if that visit was somehow disrupted in protests. We know, know, of course, that right now, however, it's not a quiet time in France. We've seen, of course, we mentioned the visit of the leader of opposition to Paris very recently. But of course, a papal visit in Marseille. We've got the Rugby World Cup on at the same time. There are events in Paris, as well as other protests in Paris against, for example, police violence. And one of the strong legacies of those pension reforms has been a questioning of the role of police violence in France. And that remains an ongoing issue, I think, that, remember, the anger of the pension reforms hasn't gone away. The state has shown itself to be intransigent in terms of the voice of the streets. But this is
Andrew
a moment
Smith,
which
I'm so sorry, I'm going to have to cut you off. I do apologise. Andrew Smith, fascinating as ever talking to you. Andrew Smith, historian of modern France and lecturer, thank you very much indeed.